You're now watching Winter Nightwolf Live, a Cliff Dive production.
OCO and greetings. I'm Winter Nightwolf, and this is the American Indian Indigenous Peoples Truths, Justice for All, the most dangerous show on media anywhere. I'm so happy that all of you have tuned in to view this broadcast tonight because I have a very special guest that has been a friend and a brother for many years. His name is Barry LENOIR. Are you with me, Barry?
Hey, I'm here. I'm happy to be with you and blessed by the best.
There you go.
To share this time with you tonight.
Good. So,
Hi,
Barry.
I see Sandra Hope. I'm
How
honored
you
to see you
doing?
again. Very good. Very
Good.
good. Good to see you again.
You too. Been too long.
So Barry is actually a Chickahominy Native American from Virginia. And Barry is the CEO, am I right, of the United Black Fund.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Barry, and I want you to also mention your grandfather and anything else you want to.
It's an interesting, just a blessing. My life's been blessed in so many ways, Jay, not just by friendships with you and Sandra and others who are committed to improving the lives of human beings everywhere and focusing on the neediest human beings anywhere. And so I'm honored to share this time with you and Sandra. My life has been a very interesting journey, and I'm so honored by it, blessed by it. I was born in Alexandria, Virginia, right across from Washington, D.C., to a family of a grandfather, grandmother, my mother, her 5 brothers and sisters. The Atkins family is the name of it. And my grandfather was Andrew Warren Atkins, who was the Baptist minister at the biggest Black Baptist church in Alexandria, Alfred Street Baptist Church. For 43 years, he labored there as the minister of that church, and that church was then and it still is an anchor in the Black community, the whole of Alexandria. Now, that's a church that was able to raise $1 million for the African American Museum. That's now present on the mall, and donated $1 million to that. So it's still very vibrant and going forward. But I had no idea he was a Native American. In fact, in the African American community, there used to be an expression saying is from Mongolian yellow to Dewberry black. This is what African Americans are, and so we didn't really think about it. Sadly, until his death, and when he died, we were all curious. Those of us who thought we knew all about him. Native Americans, almost the whole of the Charles City Chickahominy tribe came up for his services, and embarrassingly, they knew about me. I didn't know about them. Well, that I can guarantee you, I know about them now, and I'm very pleased to know that the chief of the tribe, Steve Atkins, has done a remarkable job. This is one of the tribes that's recently achieved recognition from the federal government. One of the 6 Virginia tribes that just received recognition from the federal government. And one of my grandfather's grand nephews is the chief of that tribe, Steve Atkins, who's done just a crazy good job in getting that tribe recognized and working that through the halls we call the halls of shame sometimes, but the halls of Congress. And so we're hats off to him. But the other part of me is from the plantations in Tennessee. That's from my father's people. And so we lived growing up. He met my mother at Knoxville College, historic Black college. That's a story in itself, as you know. The story of historic Black colleges is not just African Americans, but Native Americans as well.
Right.
Those schools like Virginia Union and those schools in the South that were set up, constructed.
And Hampton Institute.
That were constructed as a place where Blacks and Native Americans could come and learn. and grow intellectually. So they met at Knoxville College in Knoxville, Tennessee, because my dad was from Alcoa, Tennessee.
Mhm.
Now people say when they hear my name is Lenore, they correct me and say, your name is Lenoir, isn't it? And I say, well, my dad was from Alcoa, Tennessee, and the only language they spoke there was aluminum. Nobody spoke French in Alcoa. At any rate, I'm blessed because his mother had some Cherokee heritage in her. Excuse me. So on both sides of my family, the Native American heritage is very strong, and it also shows up in many ways. The love I have for the outdoors, being outdoors, being the love I have for the flight of an eagle or a hawk. The kind of things you're drawn to naturally without any effort that I attribute to my Native American heritage. And I have to say that my grandson now won't eat anything unless he can get the aroma first.
Yeah.
He won't touch anything unless he gets the aroma first. I relate directly to that, and I relate that to part of my heritage from the Native American community. We lived growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, to start with. My father worked his way into the YMCA, and that's it, Sandra. That's the one. And but it was at a time when the YMCA was the Christian organization, like any other Christian organization, was as segregated as anything in Alabama, Birmingham.
Right.
And so there was a black YMCA in Cincinnati. I think it was called the 9th Street YMCA. And in those days of segregation, even though Cincinnati was historically had played a role in the Underground Railroad, people there played a role in the Underground Railroad. Native Americans in Ohio helped with that process. That's a story to be told as well. And still, they were segregated, de facto segregated, as they say. That means they were segregated not by law but by practice. And but the 9th Street YMCA, the thing about segregation that I remember there in Cincinnati, Jay and Sandra, is that if you had Major League Baseball coming into its own with blacks beginning to show up in Major League Baseball, if they came to Cincinnati, they couldn't stay in the hotels with their white teammates. So they would stay in the black YMCA, or they would stay with members of the community.
Right.
An experience that was just wonderful for people who were discriminated against, segregated, not by choice, but by law and force. And the fact that you had the athletes of those times so willing to rub shoulders with and get down with the local community was a fabulous thing. I think, in fact, you're beginning to see a recurrence of that connection with athletes of the day, people like LeBron James and others who were doing a lot of things. Durant, who just set up a gymnasium out here in Capitol Heights, Maryland. They're doing a lot of things now to show their connection to the condition and the goals and the needs of the African American community. But in those days, it was segregated. So he was with the Black YMCA, and eventually moved to Dallas, Texas. And if the segregation in Dallas, Texas was tight.
Mm-hmm.
Had those things tied down completely. It was one of those things where you have everything was segregated. The schools were segregated. They had the white-only drinking fountains, and you couldn't go into drugstores downtown. The drugstores in your neighborhood, the same chain that would in your neighborhood, wouldn't allow you to come in and get a soda in the downtown stores. And as I said, the schools were segregated. But let me tell you, the folk in those towns, and you had blacks and Hispanics working together in those days in Texas. In those towns, they had found a way to understand that God didn't make them dependent on others for their growth and development. God didn't make them dependent. They weren't born dependent on others for learning and raising children, being productive, developing values, developing their spiritual side. So they had organized educational systems, recreational systems that went statewide, not just in the city of Dallas where I lived, and not just Dallas and Fort Worth, but we were connected with black schools in Houston, Texas, black schools in Anderson, black schools in Austin. All the statewide, the black high school and junior high school had a network that was connected. So that enabled you to meet people from all walks of life, all ways about them. And there was, in fact, I think it was patterned on the historic black college system. So when we went to school, there was something for everybody that would attract everybody to the school. If you just wanted to play music and didn't want to do quadratic equations all your life, there's a big band you could join, or there's a huge choir you could join, or you could join the drill team, or the cheerleaders of the pom-pom girls. You could join the ROTC program. There was just a multitude of things that young people would attract young people, whatever their interests were. There was something in that school system that would allow them to come in and participate, encourage them, and draw them in, really. And so in that segregated environment, those communities were tightly organized. And I'm privileged to have been there when the community decided to dismantle segregation and went out on picket lines and ticketed the hotels and the theaters and the drugstores downtown and began to break that whole system down in Dallas, Texas. We went from there to St. Louis, Missouri. We went from St. Louis to Harlem, and from Harlem to Washington, D.C. And, you know, everywhere I've been, I have to tell you, I've seen the same conditions pressing in on our community.
Okay, Barry. Now, you're talking about this issue of racism. And what happened on January the 6th was that these folks that breached the U.S. Capitol, like they have already done for so many years, they hide behind their they hide their racism behind their fake patriotism.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's to be honest with you, Jay, we can start with the Star Spangled Banner. There's always been racism behind the images of patriotism.
Mm-hmm.
This is as American as the intolerance, the bigotry that some people have, and we're talking about essentially whites. And I'll say right now, my experience has been that the white people, there are whites in that community who are as human as anybody in my community, and as forthright and forthgoing as anybody in my community. I know that in the civil rights struggle, there were whites who put their lives on the line. One person, Jim Reed from All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., lost his life down in the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Montgomery, right.
Before that march, Reverend Reed was beaten to death by whites, by other whites killing another white person because of his association with the effort and the cause of blacks to get voting rights. And so I know that plenty of white people have been genuine and in their interest and their effort to change these conditions, these horrifying conditions. But let me tell you, the other whites, racist whites, intolerant whites, ignorant whites, who've been at the forefront of every despicable act against people who were different from them. And so that's a reality that we face. Has tainted everything this country has done. So in the January 6th situation, I was not surprised. In fact, I think that as I look back at it, I think the guy in that White House who was so desperately trying to hold on to power had in mind getting somebody held hostage, that mob would go in and grab somebody and hold them hostage. They were very clearly going after a certain number of people, a certain kind of person, and they knew exactly where to go. So you know what that suggests. Those details are beginning to come out now. And so you have this situation where I think that guy in the White House was hoping that somebody would be captured and held hostage so he could declare what? Martial law.
Yeah.
Like Pillowhead, the Pillow Man said, had on his notes, martial law. I think he was hoping to do that. And there's extraordinary powers that go to the president if there's a case, a state of martial law. So God would not did not allow that to happen. But I don't have much doubt in my mind that was one of his goals.
Well, Barry, let me interject something else. There's been an intelligence report that the U.S. Capitol Police have been notified that Trump is going to attempt to have his own inauguration tomorrow. And they beefed up security, and I hope they call the National Guard, the 3rd Marine Division, and everybody else in there. They're going to attempt to take it again tomorrow.
Well, I think you can anticipate that if that's the case, you're going to have bloodshed.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. You're going to have bloodshed if they attempt to do that. I don't doubt that the response to that will be more direct and more potent than what we saw last time. I saw one of the generals today talk about the fact that there was a memo that came out that required him to seek permission from 2 authorities before he could release the National Guard into the fray. And that took 3 hours to do. The memo was written the day before that of January 6th, on January 5th.
Right.
The things that suggest, and I hope they can dig down to the bottom of this, these are things that suggest that there's a lot more backroom development of this what happened, the events of the 6th, than we know at this time. So I'm hoping that that's going to come up. But no, and when you look at that mob, as you said, Jay, you're looking at former military people. You're looking at current police officers. And there's doubt in somebody's mind that there are people on the police force who are brutal, racist, hate-filled. To just identify those people in that mob that came to the Capitol, those police officers there. If you had any doubt, now you know better. That there's some people who work their way into the police, into positions of responsibility and trust, who are just as hate-filled and bigoted as anything you've ever seen, as George Wallace.
My nephew was just, we've had several conversations about the makeup of the military now. He said the Ku Klux Klan has infiltrated all branches of the military. And they are so afraid that because of the large number of soldiers of color now in those ranks, that they don't know where to go with this mess.
Yeah, they didn't see that coming. Because again, my view is that when they went to the all-volunteer army, knowing that half the black kids black males who go to college, go to school, don't graduate from high school,
and Native Americans,
they're eliminated from joining the service, and they went to that from fear of the returning guys returning from Vietnam in the 60s and 70s, who had been trained how to shoot and hurt somebody, and who had experience in doing that, because they put a lot of those brothers and Hispanics and and the Native Americans on the front line of those wars. They weren't sitting back at camp like in MASH. They were on the front lines, taking fire and giving fire. And when they realized that the riots happened in '68, and you had now a trained force, individuals trained to protect themselves and protect those people they care about, they suddenly came up with something called the all-volunteer army. You had to have a high school diploma in order to get it. And so those people who, knowing that half the black males don't graduate from high school, so you've eliminated half of black males. If you don't have that problem anymore. And here's the problem I have with it today, Jay.
Okay.
They're pulling, these people going to war are really in the National Guard. And in Washington, D.C., you have some terrific guardsmen. That's a great program in the National Guard, both the Air and Army. But those are some of the most upstanding people in the communities. They're some of the people who are reliable, anchoring communities. But you're taking this group of some of our best and brightest and throwing them into the theater of war. And we know the damage that does. both to individuals and communities.
But another fact that's always overlooked is that per capita, there has been historically a larger amount of Native Americans serving in the military than any other group. Let's go back to Iwo Jima when the flag was raised. Ira Hayes, Native American. And I can just name all of these guys that have gotten silver stars and bronze stars and even congressional medals of honor that were all Native people. But after, we stood up, put our hand up, and took the oath to protect the Constitution, then when they get discharged, they have nothing to go back to.
That's right. And sadly, that's the case then, and it's the case today. It was as it was, so it is. And you're right. Native Americans volunteered, stood up with courage, dedication, and valor, and went into war on behalf of this country. An extraordinary thing, and performed extremely well, exceptionally well. And yet, when they come back to their villages, the tribal groups, there's no support for their families, no support for their children, no support for their community. And then there are no programs, the programs that exist to help communities like that are beyond their reach too often.
True.
And the contacts you have to have. Well, as I said, my Steve Atkins with the Chickahow tribe labored for 25 years to get simple recognition. And he's always said that's recognition is not going to necessarily change our community to the extent that we want it to. But we're dedicated to doing that ourselves. I love that. I'm going to help myself in this, but I'm entitled to that. And I'm going to get what I'm entitled to. And I'm still going to do these things for myself. It's going to be my effort, the effort of my people and my community to make this right. Even though we know you didn't make it wrong to begin with.
That's right. So Barry, let's change horses right now. I think that's Lori Piestewa. She was the Native woman that got killed. But Barry, let's kind of switch gears a little bit. The United Black Fund. How did you get involved with that?
Oh, years ago, and when I was a student at Howard University years ago, when the United Black Funds first started, I participated in their first campaign. And when I went to law school, graduated from law school, I joined their organization with Calvin and Wilhelmina Rollard.
Yeah,
two extraordinary. I'm telling you, two outstanding, extraordinary community activists and servants. And I mean servant in the full sense of the word. They were so highly dedicated, but to get this, they were also so well prepared for the challenges that faced them. I don't think I've ever met a person more dynamic than Calvin Rollard in his ability to deal with people and to make the issues clear. And I certainly have never met anybody more prepared, technically prepared, than Wilhelmina Rollard to fight those people who needed to be fought. So they started the United Black Fund in response to the denial. There's something called the Combined Federal Campaign. I think most communities have that. And that campaign allows nonprofit organizations to solicit donations from the federal workforce. And that really is kind of a wheel that makes a lot of the charities go round. That funds a lot of the charities. I think at one time they raised over $60 million in the Combined Federal Campaign.
Right.
Well, they denied the application. I think it was the Stoddard Baptist Home applied to join that campaign, a completely Black organization. They were denied. And Calvin and Wilhelmina took up the challenge of challenging those rules and regulations that resulted in that denial. Well, Wilhelmina fought a legal case against the United Way of America, the Combined Federal Campaign, also personnel management, and went up against the battery of some of the biggest lawyers in the country, and fought to the point where they had to settle that case. And the settlement resulted in, interestingly enough, that settlement resulted in the formation of the United Way of the National Capital Area. There wouldn't have been a United Way of the National Capital Area if Calvin and Wilhelmina, and I happened to be working with them at the time, if that effort had not been made to challenge those people in court, there wouldn't be a United Way of the National Capital Area. And so we come full term now, because the United Way has become one of the most exclusive organizations, nonprofits in the world.
That's right.
In order to be a United Way organization, you have to have $50,000 annual revenue. You can't join it without that. And so they came up with that rule maybe 7 years ago when United Black Fund, we were able to recruit 48 agencies, small mom and pop organizations, but who have the right and a program of service that should entitle them to present their case to the donating federal government employees. You know, and then what would our communities be like without those mom and pop organizations? Somebody working with 15 kids or 20 kids, or somebody who's spending mostly money out of their own pocket to teach kids how to sew or how to write or how to read or how to shoot a basketball. Mm-hmm. Well, they came up with this rule about 7 years ago or so, that you had to have $50,000 to be a United Way organization. So that's fine for the Cancer Society and the Red Cross and, you know, some of those other organizations. Some organizations work with animals. Some organizations, but Mama Safe Haven, who's working with kids at Potomac Garden, can't get that. Uniting Our Youth over in one of the hotbeds of public housing can't get that. Woodland Tigers can't get that, who are working with kids in Congress Heights. And so organizations that are really on the ground, but small, can't participate in the United Way. Yet they hold themselves out as representing everybody. They don't have a boot on the ground anywhere in the area, and that's sad. And so we've challenged them in court. We still have a case pending. It's before the Court of Appeals now, and we're saying they've made a mistake in this. You can't find a United Way anywhere in the nation that has the rules that this one in Washington, D.C. has. Just designed to keep small organizations out. When you look at the fact that the chief executive officer over there, who 2 or 3 years ago was making $50,000 a year, is now making $500,000 a year salary. $500,000 a year. Their salary is almost doubled in the last 3 or 4 years. People don't know these things. People aren't aware of these things. We're broadcasting that because people are entitled to know. If I give $100 to United Way, how many people have to give $100 before the people organizations who belong to that get a dime? Since you got to spend $500,000 paying the chief executive officer there. We think it's criminal. I was going to say criminal. We think it's unholy.
It's morally wrong. But, you know, before Sandra's got a question for you, but, you know, talking about Wilhelmina Rolock. Wilhelmina Rolock and my godmother were girlfriends. You probably heard of her, Judge Margaret Haywood.
Of course.
Right. Well, that was my godmother. Lived right down the street from me.
Fantastic.
And she actually introduced me to Wilhelmina when I was a little boy.
Mm-hmm.
And what a gracious lady. What a warm.
Judge Haywood. I can tell you this, Judge Haywood, Marjorie Lawson, Rolock, all went to Terrell Law School.
Yeah.
Terrell Law School was a school set up by some people who were lawyers out of Howard University years. This is in like the 40s now, I think, or 40s and 50s, where Howard had a night law school program and closed it. But a lot of the people like Wilhelmina and Margaret Haywood and Margaret Lawson were working at the time. And so they could only go to school at night. Well, some of the professors and some of the administrators got together and set up the Terrell Law School, which was a night law school. But that law school produced Wilhelmina Rolock, Margaret Haywood, Judge Marjorie Lawson, Judge Haywood. That's and so, you know, it's an example for all of us that we can do things, that we have to keep doing these things, accomplishing and responding to these and setting up our programs for ourselves, because that gives us the best result. That's why these schools are doing so well. Kids could go. I did happen to look at something today on Facebook, but it showed a group of black students graduating from Harvard Medical School.
Right.
They didn't have any. They didn't have any problem with their identification as black people. Our group of people graduate, a group of blacks coming together dressed in all black, who are graduating from Harvard's law school right now. And well, that's the kind of thing that comes from us trusting each other and working with each other and not leaning on everybody else. We've got the resources, the mental capability, the wherewithal, the muscle, mental muscle, and physical muscle to do these things ourselves. And it's the same, it's no different from the Native American community. It's a hell of a challenge. Now, I'm not making light of this. It's not easy. It's easy to talk about, but it's not easy to accomplish. But the principle I think that is going to serve us over time, that's going to sustain, is when we put our hands on this together and we join together and begin to trust each other more. But if I can bring what I know and my skills to what you and Sandra know, then something's going to come out of that. There's no question in my mind. Something positive is going to result from that. Now that just means we have to spend our time at the level where the things have to change so much. That means at the community level. I'm not one of these people like to, I don't think we can change this. We would never have changed the voting rights laws if people hadn't gone en masse into the place where the hostility, the racism, the flames were burning. We would never have accomplished voting rights if people had not been willing to go down to the Pettus Bridge and try to walk across it to go register to vote. And I'm saying we're not going to change the conditions in the communities that are so dehumanizing, where kids are being raised on messages that you and I didn't hear until we were 30. Now you got kids 13 and 14 hearing messages, seeing inappropriate information, images, wide open internet with no adult controls in place. And then you've got this drumbeat of violence in all the video games. I'm telling you, you got the drumbeat of violence. The kids who are playing video games 8 hours a day are, there's a game called Grand Theft Auto, where you can't win the game unless you take snatch your purse from an old lady, a senior citizen, or shoot at the policeman. So in other words, it's an anti-hero. In order to win the game, you got to be an anti-hero. Well, these are dehumanizing values. Our kids are sitting there with those video games of Call of Duty, killing, just shooting everybody. You can't win the game unless you shoot everybody in front of you. They're learning. If you put those kids in front of a lunar landing simulator, with the time they're spending, they could land the lunar lander on the moon or Mars with the kind of time they're spending. So they're learning vicariously to do what? To be self-destructive, to disrespect humanity, not to value life. And you see that every day, not just in DC, in Chicago especially, all over. Richmond, most violent city, in one of the top 10 most violent cities, I think, St. Louis, Missouri, in the world. I'm not talking about in the nation, in the world. Mm-hmm. Baltimore's on the list in the top 20, Detroit in the top 50. And we're all cooking the same thing. I said my journey did what? My journey went where? It went to Cincinnati, Dallas, St. Louis, Harlem, Washington. It's the same thing. Everywhere I went, I saw the same economic challenge.
Sandra, go ahead, Go ahead.
Well, I didn't have a question per se, but what I wanted to say was, Barry, you are aware that there are many of us in this circle who are trying to bring unity to all of these peoples of color that we're involved. So we're trying to reunite, Black Americans. We're trying to reunite Native Americans, American Indians, all of those color labels that are used. We're trying to bring unity back and bring all of those people back into the circle, because it was the division and the intentional division that separated us, and that causes us now to have so much trouble coming together to fight all of these things that are keeping us down. So, there were of course, the federal recognition, state recognition for tribes, all of those things caused division, caused tribes to think that you had to have 100% native DNA, think that you couldn't have any other color distribution that that separated us. And we know now that there are many people walking around they have indigenous ancestry, but in the past it was easier for them to just say they were Black for one reason or another, or it was easier for them to just hide and just not say what they were. But we know that, because everybody walking around doesn't look like, the stereotypical Pocahontas and Tonto, there are indigenous people all around us. And you, Barry, of course, you said that you became aware of your indigenous ancestry when the tribe attended your grandfather's funeral.
Right.
So since that point, since you connected to how many years ago was that when you first?
It's some time ago.
Okay, so since then, I'm sure you've attended in the past before the nasty C COVID word. I know you had attended some of the Chickahominy powwows.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Yeah.
And so you've been able to remake that connection. And so, what we all need to understand is that we have to build our own tables. There's the initiative and the big goal to get a seat at the table. Sometimes I think we don't want a seat at the table. We want to build our own tables because the existing tables are just it's a lot of that BS. And I think that the unity that we can all build, and I know that you're building that. I know that Jay's building that. I'm trying to build it. We're trying to save the circle. We are identifying people who can come back into that human circle that Jay always speaks about. And, we really appreciate what you're doing. You're head of United Black Fund. You didn't have to say you had Native ancestry, but by doing so, you open up a door for other people to do that as well. And, we don't think that you have to have a card to be Native. Once you find out you have Native ancestry, you study it, you learn about it, you respect it. And then when it's the right time, you embrace it. I don't like that we all have some kind of a blend, right? So it's hard to say that anybody is 100% anything anymore. And we need to just bring unity to that circle and come back together so that we can get rid of all this nonsense. There's a lot of people that we've connected with, and you connect with somebody, and that somebody connects with somebody else, and together we can just build our own table. And that is the great picture from a couple of years ago. Barry, you were gracious enough to come to the Loudoun NAACP Freedom Fund banquet. And that was us at the end of that banquet. And you gave a wonderful, wonderful presentation at that banquet. Can you tell us that story again?
No,
it was about, yeah.
Say again.
Can you tell us that brief story that you gave at the NAACP banquet when you were on stage?
I'm not sure if I can tell it again.
You talked one about natives and enslaved people helping each other.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that it was the NAACP banquet, but I also appreciate your role, the role you played in bringing up the issues of what's happening to Native American women and the despicable reality that their lives are not valued, that the security authorities, the criminal justice authorities do not give attention to the crimes and the mutilations that take place in Native American families. Yeah. And the reaction there is just guttural. Their reaction is guttural. I think right away about what's happening to Chinese or Asian people in this country right now, where an Asian person can be walking down the street and someone will hit them, push an old lady around. There's a viciousness. There's a deep viciousness in some people in this country. And the fact that the NAACP joined with your initiative to expose this problem. And I'll never forget the speech that Mark Charles made, the Native American who ran for president. Thank God he did. And the incredible presentation he made, the history and his command of why there was a need for a Native American to stand forward and to accept that challenge. And then we had young Native Americans from Carolina, if I recall correctly, who had come to talk about the issues. But the fact that this was a forum, a banquet at the NAACP, was, I think, an indication of how natural these connections are. I see a picture of Mark Charles on the screen right now, an incredible young man with an incredible message. And as we see this, as we make this quilt, it's important to realize that it's more than just what we had in common historically that's important here, that brings us together. It's what we have in common in our own belief structure, in our own values, in our own appreciation for human life and nature. Those things join us together as well. And the fact that we can do this with the NAACP just indicates how powerful it can be if we continue to pursue those relationships. You know, right now, we have a site, my family has a site dedicated to my grandfather called the Atkins Family Site. And we're attracting, we've gone through his brothers and sisters, we've identified all of his family just about. We've located some of the other family members in the extended family, and we're reaching out to deal with that. His children, remarkable in itself, a social worker, someone who worked with the NSA and the, what was the name of the movie where you had someone, black women working with the challenge of code breaking. One of his daughters was in that group. We had a Tuskegee Airman in that group. All of these are his children, the children of a Native American. And so we have collected this thing, but we know that we have to reach out and connect with people with the reality that this is to our great advantage. This is a natural connection, more than historical. We believe we have some of the same appreciations for life, for how to live, for nature, how to enjoy nature, how to integrate yourself with nature, how to accept the power and the information that nature provides. And so I agree, Sandra, this is something we need to promote. We need to continue to reach out to each other in ways that perhaps at this time when everybody has this COVID challenge on their hands, perhaps there's no better time than now to extend ourselves further and more directly to each other. African Americans, part Native American, part Irish American, the whole diaspora.
Human family, the human family.
The whole diaspora, that's right, the human family. I always admired Jesse Jackson's, the name of Jesse Jackson to begin with first, but also the name of his organization, People United to Save Humanity. To a certain extent, that's what we're talking about. Uniting to save humanity. I know for my own children, my own grandchildren. I see my grandfather and several of my grandchildren. I see my grandfather on both sides of my family and several of my grandchildren. I know for them, my hope is that we'll continue to find people who are positive, who are intentional in how they engage the challenges of today, who are determined and vigilant in dealing with the problems and the assault on humanity that comes from certain quarters in our world, not just in our country. And so the press, it is time, I think, Sandra, as you suggest, it's time for us to press through whatever limitations, whatever issues of mistrust that may be present. It's time for us to press through that. On the mall, on one corner of the mall, you have the Native American Museum. On the other corner of the mall, you have the African American Museum. And it's important for us to go to both. It's important for us to to not just go to both, but to combine both in a sense that there is a story that neither one tells at this point, but that both should be telling. And so I think you're right. I think it's important for us to continue to reach out to each other and to do things intentionally with each other. What's coming up? This COVID thing has pinned everybody down. But now look at us on the screen. I'm a dinosaur. But look at how we're talking to each other. We're speaking to each other. I mean, we're communicating with each other. And so we have to be intentional about this forum. I know, Jay, you had an organization you were establishing for Blacks and Native Americans. And I think I hope you continue to set that format up.
The National Congress of Black American Indians.
Right. I hope you continue to set that up, because that would provide a forum for us to be intentional in dealing with these issues and bringing other people's ideas forward to deal with them as well.
Okay, Barry, thank you so much for being on the show with us tonight, because we've got like 3 or 4 minutes left. And thank you, Sandra.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me, man, and I'll see you soon.
You'll come back again, right?
Say again?
We
You
still
will
have
come
a few
back
minutes, Jay.
We have 5 minutes, Sandra.
I think there was a question that somebody had wanted to see if they could ask. There it is. Mr. Carbon Master.
Okay, well, let me answer that question. First of all, before the African came here and before the white man came here for Europe, our people were from a medium brown skin to a very dark brown. Africans came here 50,000 years ago. The Phoenicians, they were black ocean going sea merchants. They didn't come here to take anything from anybody. They didn't come here to marginalize or subjugate anybody. They came here because they had heard stories of people on the other side of that big body of water, the Atlantic Ocean. They came here in peace. We greeted them in peace. They left here in peace. And some of the tribes from the northeastern part of the United States actually got into international trade and traveled with them on their big ships. The next people to come here from Africa were the people from Mali, and a lot of them stayed here. But I always get this question where some people think that the original people of the Western Hemisphere were black people. They were not. My question to them is, who did they meet when they came here? Who was here? They were medium brown to dark skinned people, but they were not Africans. So I hope that clears that question up. However, we as a people in the Western Hemisphere have always been an open and willing people to accept anybody and everybody. When the white man came here and invaded us, and as they continued their war of invasion and subjugation and marginalization of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, and when he got out to places like South Dakota and North Dakota, when they met Red Cloud, when they met Crazy Horse, they didn't look at them as being white people. They looked at them as being members of the human family. So my question to them is, why couldn't they be civil too? They came here because they were being kicked out of Europe by the crown heads of Europe. And when they came here and landed in our pristine waters and saw our bountiful homelands, they were no longer the victims. They turned around and we became the victims and they were the victors. So this whole idea of Africans being the first people here, no, you need to forget about that one. You really need to go back and study history and find out who was here first. Now, this whole thing about blood quantum, the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma in their Supreme Court just issued a decree and said, never again will we determine a person's eligibility to be a Cherokee in the Cherokee Nation by blood quantum. That was a white man's thing. And blood quantum, the Dawes rolls, the Baker's rolls, and all of those other rolls were set in place to eliminate Indians over a period of time. I'm so glad that the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma woke up before it's too late. You follow what I'm saying, Barry?
I think you nailed it, Jay.
That whole divide and conquer crap. They didn't come here as peaceful people. They came here to take whatever they could get.
You know, bragging rights is we're not looking for bragging rights, but you know what I'm saying? It's like I was here first. You know, who's on first, who's on second, no who's on first. I'm saying that you're not going to figure out or be able to document that somebody came here and found black people or red people. You're not going to document that. I don't think you have to. Truth is that when modern history connected with this country, Native Americans proliferated. And it may be like Ivan the Server says, that they came before Columbus. I hope they did. You know, I hope he's right. But the question now is, what are we going to do now that we're here in this condition? And how do we join together to improve our power, to enhance our power and our ability to change the conditions that so negatively affect Native Americans and black people, and Hispanics and Asians?
So what do we do to make this condition better?
And poor whites as well.
Answers to. We don't need to go back and argue about who the hell was here first. If you really want to know the truth, 50,000 years ago, there were Native American people from the northeastern part of the United States that got into their dugouts and discovered Europe. There's evidence of it in Galway. There's a book, if you don't believe me, it's called The American Discovery of Europe by Dr. Jack D. Forbes. You want answers? Read a book, get some information. Don't go on something somebody told you or somebody in your group think, you know, no, that's dangerous. Get some facts, get some information, and be thorough about what you do. The only time, you know, so many people, the only way they get exercise is to jump to conclusions. And I'm sick of people jumping to conclusions without having anything to back up what they think. So don't bring me that mess, because I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to accept it. Anyway, I'm sorry, that's me. I want to thank you all for being a part of this broadcast, especially you that have tuned in. Now, would you do us a favor? Would you go to YouTube and would you like the show and subscribe to the broadcast, Winter Nightwolf Live, and leave a comment, because that's very important into what we do in the future, even what we do next week. I know a lot of you out there remember this group back in the 70s, Redbone. And it says, they made this song, Come and Get Your Love. All right, so listen, they're going to be on with us next week. Those that are still with us on this side of the Great Divide, those that have not walked on into spirit world, they're going to be on, along with Arcella Cortese, who is the wife of Pat Bakers. And there's an author that wrote a book, the first book about a biographical book about Redbone. He's going to be on too. So don't forget to tune in next week. And don't forget to go to YouTube and like the broadcast, leave a comment, and subscribe to Winter Nightwolf Live. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Sandra, appreciate you, baby, sis.
Thank you. And also quick shout out to those people who have reached out to us on email with inquiries. We've got those and we're looking into them. So we will comment on those as soon as we can. So we appreciate you giving us that feedback. And I want to thank you, Barry, for being here. You are the man. I mean, you are incredibly awesome.
He's
And
the
your
man.
grandfather is proud of you. Your grandfather is really proud of you, and we are proud of you. And we are so happy you joined us. And I just want to thank everybody for watching. And as Jay mentioned, be sure to check us out next week, next Wednesday, 7 p.m., when we have Redbone, and Jay might sing "Come and Get Your Load."
Don't start. Don't you start. Barry, thank you again, man. Everybody that's viewing, that man in that red hat is my brother, and he's been my brother for over 25 years. I love him. So don't forget to tune in next week to see Redbone and me, and I'm not singing,
Hey.
So to the guy that wrote us, Mr. Carbon Master, he said, Jay Winter Nightwolf, it's all peace and love. Sing back at you, my brother. It's all about love. There it is. And love is going to help us to get through a lot of this mess that we're facing as people of color in America and in the world. And I'll send these words to you in Cherokee. Danada, Kauai, Wado. Until we talk again. See you next Wednesday.